And Congressman Raskin wrote a beautiful foreword for American Shield, which he's going to read for us.
Now,
you don't mind?
I'm thrilled to be here with you and with Aquilino and this beautiful family I've heard so much about and read about. And it's a thrill to get to meet them. And I brought with me my wife, Sarah Raskin, who's here, and my district chief, Kathleen Connor. And I see I've got a very distinguished constituent here, Harry Dunn, Officer Harry Dunn. Oh, is he here? Oh, hey. Hello, Officer Hodges, Officer Daniel Hodges. That's great. All right, well, I guess I'll read this. Sergeant Gonell asked me to write something, and I think I wrote it during one of the hearings on my phone.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was from the heart for you. Okay, and I just titled my little preface, "This is how you pronounce patriot." When future generations come to tell the story of the violent insurrection and attempted coup at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and of the sharp social disparities, political corruption, and ideological fanaticism that set the stage for this catastrophe, the spotlight will of necessity shine on the disgraced and twice impeached ex-president Donald Trump, the pathological liar, narcissist, and con man who set all of the relevant events into motion and ruthlessly incited the bloody mob violence that shook America to its core. But who will become the symbol of the besieged American democracy that fought back with vigor and honor at every turn, narrowly defeating a violent and unlawful seizure of the presidency outside of the constitutional order? It just might be the unlikely figure of former Capitol Police Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, an immigrant from the Dominican Republic and naturalized citizen with an accent, a U.S. Army veteran who fought in the Iraq War, no bone spurs, and then joined the Capitol Police, where he served honorably for 16 years before he was badly wounded in the January 6th riot and forced to leave the police force. This remarkable little book tells the life of a man who is billionaire Donald Trump's absolute opposite in nearly every respect. Born into a large destitute family in the countryside of the Dominican Republic, Aquilino learned a ferocious and honest work ethic from an early age, taking jobs stocking groceries at a bodega and selling his beloved mother's food door to door in impoverished neighborhoods. Aquilino did share something in common with Donald Trump. He also had a mean son of a bitch as a father. But where Trump came to identify completely with his racist cheat of an old man, Aquilino rebelled early against his father's constant domestic slights, aggressions, and betrayals. Trump's character weakness made him a hateful, authoritarian bully. Aquilino's character strength made him a man of courage, respect, and honor, all the makings of a true patriot. When Aquilino's family moved to New York City, he was a tiny little fish out of water, a shy immigrant kid who could not speak English, was falling way behind in school, badly missed his revered grandfather and family back in the Dominican Republic, worked to make money for his family all the time, and despaired of having any real future in the urban jungle of New York City, where the still distant dream of America. But Aquilino had something that marked him for happiness and growth in the world, a love of learning and education, even against all the odds stacked up around him, like tenement buildings. He connected with one of his teachers who pulled him up out of the doldrums and taught him painstakingly how to pronounce the word patriot. She also sent him on a class trip to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where he would meet a Capitol Police officer who would plant in him the seeds of a lifelong career ambition. Aquilino became the first person in his family ever to graduate from high school. He wanted to go to college, which was not in the cards financially for him, until he learned about the possibility of joining the U.S. Army and getting his tuition paid for. He also learned that he could become a naturalized citizen through his Army service. This is how he ended up in Iraq, getting an intense education in military bureaucracy, the democratic and humane impulses of America's young people, the cruel folly of imperial war, and the corruption and deceit of a lot of politicians. Returning from war, he went to college, still struggling with his thick Dominican accent, but he ended up in his American dream job, serving as an officer on the Capitol Police Force. It never could have occurred to him that his decorated career as a Capitol cop would end with injuries suffered in the worst violent insurrection at the Capitol in American history. He experienced more brutal violence in Washington than he ever saw in Baghdad. When he testified before the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack, he famously described the experience of fighting a rampaging mob of Trump supporters for hours to defend the Capitol. The members of Congress and the Vice President as something like participating in medieval combat, an image of his that swept the country and was borrowed from him by President Joe Biden. But I will let him tell you the full bloody story of the day he thought was going to be his very last on earth. He and his brothers in arms, Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn of Maryland's beautiful 8th District, Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone, and Officer Daniel Hodges, who was tortured before the entire world in the Capitol doorway by an insurrectionist, have not just a right, but they have a duty to tell the world the stories of what they just barely lived through on that day when we almost lost American democracy. What you need to know is that there is beautiful, life-affirming magic in this book. And we all owe Sergeant Gonell, his wife Monica, and his justly proud son a debt of gratitude and solidarity. Aquilino Gonell's name is very tough to pronounce, but to me, it sounds a lot like the word patriot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's beautiful. So I'll ask you guys questions. So Congressman Raskin, do you remember the first time that you met Sergeant Gonell?
Well, I remember the first time we met after January 6th.
Yes.
Yes, I do, at the hearing, yes. But I think we met a couple times before because, yeah, I mean, he protects us.
We run into each other a lot of times, but never like to have a conversation because
we never read books together before.
And Sergeant Gonell, you told me that you had a very distinct impression of the congressman, the way he was asking questions and what happened at the hearing. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, the first time I actually talked to him was after my testimony, and the way he came out, it was like very like a scholar, legal scholar, very like a well thought out orator, a statement, and I kind of like that he was enthralled with legal stuff and a lot of history for our country. So when he asked me, is there anything else I could do for you? Let me know. I'll think about it and then come back. Let me do that. I need a favor for the forward. So he came through.
Great. Congressman, I loved Unthinkable. I thought it was just an amazingly beautiful book. And you write about the trauma that you had been going through, you know, personally, and also what was going on with January 6th. Could you sense with Sergeant Gonell that he was also traumatized by what happened in January 6th based on the way he was answering questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was still very much injured, I think, and in pain when he came in. And all four of the officers spoke with extraordinary power and poignancy about what had taken place. And, you know, one of my frustrations during the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, which ended with that 57-43 vote, was that we were not able to bring officers up to tell the story of what had happened because you know, it didn't go directly to Donald Trump's own personal culpability for setting the events into motion. But as a member of the January 6th committee, I, you know, went and lobbied the chairman and I spoke at length to the members saying that we've got to start by hearing from them about what happened on that day from their perspective. And they came, and I think it was riveting for the country to hear from them about what had taken place. So it was clear to me that, you know, Aqui felt it very strongly. He was living with it every day, the way all of the officers were, and he was determined to get the truth out to the country.
And Sergeant Gonell, you mentioned to me that you had mixed feelings about coming forward and that your wife was uncomfortable with you speaking out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I knew, like, right after I saw Damian Hodges, Michael Fanone, and other officers, two from MPD. I think it was like a week after they did a Washington Post article, and I'm like, if their day was like that, mine was worse. So I wanted to bring out, tell my story, tell what happened to me, what I went through. However, because of my thick accent, as you will see later, and also out of concern from my family, because at that time, the former guy, he still has a lot of influence over a lot of people. And at that time, we all were like terrified about him and what he could do in on issue, not only on any particular person, but throughout the country, as we witnessed on January 6th. So that was the main concern, and I think heeding my wife concern, I kind of kept my mouth shut, like I had done in the past, in terms of not calling attention to myself and our family, and also it was a way to protect them as well too.
And Congressman Raskin, did you have any second thoughts about, you know, some of the stuff that you say in Unthinkable, and even what you wrote in the forward? Was there any fear of any kind of retribution from the president or threats or anything like that?
Oh, he's clearly not interested in retribution or vengeance. You know,
only hugs and kisses.
You know, I mean, I tell the story of, you know, how Sarah and I and our family lost Tommy, our son, just a week before we had his burial service the day before. It was on January 5th. It was a very cold, gray, dreary day, and we were under COVID-19 restrictions. And when the insurrectionists broke through and there was chaos and madness and they were pounding on the doors of the house, and the officers were being bloodied, and we really didn't know which way it was going to go. I was very angry. I was very concerned for our daughter Tabitha and our son-in-law Hank, who were there with me. But one thing I never experienced was fear of Trump or those people. He just lost the most precious. I've been afraid, and I've not been afraid of them, and we can't be afraid of them. We're still in the middle of this thing, obviously, and so you know, these officers acted with so much courage on that day. You know, and we had members of Congress who could not show the courage. You know, like Kevin McCarthy, who he knew Donald Trump was responsible. That's why he called Donald Trump from his office saying, "You've got," and Trump said, "Oh, you know, those are my people, those are Antifa." And McCarthy said, "No, they're in my office, these are your people." He knew they were his people. And then Trump said, "Well, maybe they just care a little bit more about a fair election than you do, Kevin." And McCarthy knew it was wrong, and yet he could not summon up the courage that Liz Cheney and 10 Republicans had to vote to impeach, just like Mitch McConnell could not summon up the courage that 7 Republican senators had to vote to convict in the face of overwhelming evidence. But my feeling all along has been, if these guys can show the courage to put everything on the line and to go through these terrible physical injuries, and I imagine Sergeant Gonell can explain to you what happened, and he ended up losing his position because he couldn't stay in it anymore. And I actually departed from the text of what I was going to say at one of the impeachment hearings to talk about. I don't know if you remember that one, where I talked about Sergeant Gonell having to leave the force. I thought, if they can do that, I mean, certainly we can have the courage to at least tell the truth about what had happened on January 6th, and tell the truth about the threat that was still out there during the hearings and is still out there today, to this very day, as Trump swears vengeance against his enemies and literally advances no policies that he wants to use to help people, but rather talks about all of the revenge that he wants to exact against his enemies through the Department of Justice and through the different government agencies. So that's where we're at. And, you know, one of the reasons I feel great about American Shield and Sergeant Gonell's book and his telling his story is that it will give a lot of people courage to fight. And that's what we need.
And that's what I also, my expectation at that time was, if I come forward, if I testify, if anybody know what I had done, because I ran into Michael Finone, Hodges, Harry Dunn, all three. And for the January 6th testimony that we did, we didn't talk about our experiences. So it was kind of like unexpected that each one had a different perspective. You know, without even realizing, we gave that perspective to everyone. And I did appreciate that statement that you did during the one of the hearings. It's in the book as well. But my expectation was for Republicans and Democrats to come together, bring the country together when that happened, and that didn't happen. A week later, Kevin McCarthy, instead of repudiating the former guy, he flew to Mar-a-Lago and began the spinning cycle. So that was kind of like a disappointing and kind of like adding insult to injuries and creating my belief in the American political system.
Yeah, Sergeant, you write about in American Shield how there was more than 140 police officers who were injured, but the only ones that were speaking out to the committee were Harry Dunn, Michael Finone, Don Hodges, and you. Why do you think that was? Were they afraid to speak out?
Part of it had to do with they seen how we have been treated. So if we came forward, nothing changed. What else is there to say? You know, all they're going to do is expose themselves, be ridiculed like we have been on occasion. But then again, there are other things like, I know you say 140, but I know there were more than that, because we are type A personality, and most of the time we keep our injuries and we continue through. Like I would have been one of those persons that would not report my injuries had it not been because I couldn't walk or couldn't function. But there were officers that I know for a fact that they did not report their injuries, did not go to the hospital and continue to do their job. That was what it was expected of us. We felt really like we needed to be at work to protect not only the capital of our country and our colleagues as well.
And Congressman Raskin, when you wrote Unthinkable, were you hoping that it might change the minds of people who voted for Trump or who were downplaying the insurrection?
Well, the first thing is we've got to record the actual history, and that's why it was so important that the officers testified. I mean, already there's an effort by Trump and his followers to whitewash the whole thing and to claim that, you know, it was Antifa, which Matt Gaetz was saying on January 6th itself, or it wasn't really so bad. One of my colleagues said it was akin to just a regular tourist visit. I said, well, now you can understand why American tourists aren't very popular, if that's what a tourist visit is like. So, yeah, I mean, I've heard of armed terrorists, I hadn't heard of armed tourists. Yeah, there's been this effort to try to pretend as if it didn't happen. And so we need to keep that, you know, in the front of people's minds. I mean, remember, that was the end point of a whole sequence of events designed by Donald Trump to seize the presidency, to overthrow a presidential election, which Joe Biden had won by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. And he was adamant about staying in office, and that's what authoritarians and despots do. So January 6th poses the question of what is going to be the character of American government and American politics in this century? Are we going to go the way of Vladimir Putin in Hungary Bolsonaro in Brazil and all of the dictators and tyrants of that.
You empower. And if you look, former called political the police officers, the captives that make us look as if we were the bad guys. We were someone that the captor, and that was not the case. And then on the other hand, the Republican Party and elected officials, they claim they are pro law and order, pro rule of law. Still, single time this person says what they want is that you have a lot of people who continue, including military officers and veterans, that continue to support this guy, even though they know he's dangerous not only to our country but to everybody else. Because another statement he said last week was that he's going to begin arrest people just for because his perception of as a veteran myself, even military.
And Sergeant Gonell, what's your fantasy? I'm sorry.
I was going to say for flag in your heart or getting hit over the head with a steel pipe.
And I just think with that statement is that they only believe that when it's another group. They want the rules and the laws to be enforced against somebody else, now they're supported, now against the former president. And like I said today earlier, if you don't want to be indicted for a crime, don't commit the felony, don't commit the crime, and that will take care of it. And that way, nobody's going to prosecute you for anything.
Sergeant Gonell, when you wrote American Shield, what was your hope? Did you hope to shed light on what happened on January 6th in order to maybe change voters' minds at all? Or was it more telling your own story?
All the above. I think had it not been because of January 6th, nobody else but my family, my relatives, that would know what I had sacrificed for this country, both in the military and also as a police officer. And what got me to tell my story was a conversation that I had with Olivia Troy when at that time there were this is after our testimony, the police officer testimony to Congress and the American people. There were a lot of stories about me from people that never talked to me before. They didn't know anything about me, but yet they are making accusations and making story about me. And I wanted to tell my story on my own accord with facts, with my intake, because no good conscience would I wanted to have other people tell my story, and because they wouldn't know anything about me at that time. And I thank my wife, and I had to convince my wife to pretty much put myself out there, because I want to tell my story immediately after I seen those officers. But if I couldn't convince her, then I don't know who else would I convince.
And you write about how you never wanted to be a troublemaker in any way, and that you actually would acquiesce to authority. So was this a change? Was it a big change for you to come out against the president of the United States? Was that hard?
Yeah, it was hard because throughout since I got here to the United States, I always try to stay shy away from trouble, shy away from the spotlight. Had once in high school and also in college, they asked me to recite a poem that I wrote, and I said no, it's too many people in front of me, and look what I'm doing today. So that kind of changed. But
do you have the poem?
Unfortunately, I tried to find it. It was something racial poem. It used to be I titled it blacks and white and black, and I won first prize on it. But however, I can't find it. I did my best to. The school had been shut down, so there's no way for me to retrieve it. But I always shy away from the spotlight. I always try to follow the ranks and the chain of command, both in the military and as a police officer. Except when it comes to Harry Dunn, sometimes I had to bust his chops and get things going. But I know it was 17 years, so he's a big. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Congressman Raskin. So you write beautifully about how what happened was unthinkable. January 6, 2020 was and forever will be the day in history when Donald Trump and the racist forces he helped draw to Washington tried to steal an election, nullify the rule of law, and cancel out the voting rights of all the American people. And yet, as unthinkable as it is, what do we do with the fact that he seems to be the front runner for president?
Well, certainly in the Republican Party, I think he's consolidated his hold over the Republican Party. Yeah, I mean, with all of the books we've written, Aquilino's written, I wrote, Harry Dunn wrote a book, Daniel Hodges, have you written a book? You write a poem.
Recipe, recipe 5.
The writing has been cathartic, but with all of them, it would be great if they could end with a happy note, which was, and then American democracy continued on its way to, greater equality and social justice and defense of human rights and freedom all over the world. But we're in the middle of this thing right now. So these books are a testament to a lot of fortitude and courage that people sum it up to fight for our democracy, because we really could have lost it all on that night without the courage of these officers and without Vice President Pence giving credit where credit's due, refusing to succumb to what Trump and the MAGA people were telling him, which is just step outside of your constitutional role. The states pick an election. Leave the rest to me and my friends in the House. Leave it to Jim Jordan. And that was what they wanted to do. So yeah, we're still in the middle of this thing. And that's why I read these books as inspiration to go forward, because they were out there fighting. How long were you guys fighting? 7 hours? 6?
Well, it started around close to 1, like 10 minutes. So then that to 6.
Yeah.
But I was there from go home. Yeah.
We're talking about people who, were up basically for an entire day and were involved in medieval style combat, as Sergeant Gonell describes it. I mean, Donald Trump cannot walk from the Oval Office to the restaurant in the White House without taking a break, right? And these guys were fighting to defend American democracy for 6 hours, and being bloodied and hit with baseball bats, flags, punched, bear mace, tear gas, you name it. It's very clear to me for the yeah.
I do want to say something about Mike Pence. I mean, I know he came through on January 6th, but he did his job. However, he had information that could have helped. He still does. I mean, he's still a material witness to the events of January 6th, just like Jim Jordan and a couple of other people. But they chose to fight the subpoenas. A lot of people praise Mike Pence, but I don't, because he could have set up a press conference, tell the American people, just tell the law enforcement agencies, hey, this is what my boss has in mind. We need reinforcement. We need to fortify the Capitol, and he did it. He remained quiet.
You're absolutely right. I mean, he could have blown the whistle before.
And he still can, but
yeah.
He's a coward.
I mean, in the Republican Party, he stands out as a moral exemplar because he did his job for one day.
Couple of minutes, all that day.
Yeah.
And Congressman, aside from voting, what can your average citizen do? I mean, you know, your book and American Shield is so clearly delineates what happened on January 6th. And if it's not making a difference to half of the country, what else can we do?
Well, I always liked what Henry David Thoreau said, which is don't just vote by casting a ballot, vote every single day of your life by what you do. And so, you know, to my mind, democracy is not just a static framework of constitutional principles and laws that we defend. It is that, but for democracy to have energy and momentum, it always needs to be moving forward. It is an unfinished process, and I don't need to tell that to people in this room who are from Washington, D.C., because it's the only capital city on the planet Earth where the people are disenfranchised in their own legislature. And I was proud that when the Democrats controlled Congress in 2 of the last 4 terms, we passed DC statehood, and I got to be the floor leader for that. When I got up, I said, I want to thank the people of Washington because you have a real, valid political grievance, unlike the counterfeit MAGA people who showed up to beat up our officers and try to overthrow government. You have a real grievance, and yet you have not come down and beat people up and trashed the Capitol. You've done it the right way. You've petitioned for statehood. It's time for DC statehood to get passed in America.
And Sergeant Gonell, I know that you've testified at a lot of trials, and for the FBI, is there something healing? I know at the beginning it was hard to speak out, but now it seems like you feel it's very important to continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that I have made I feel very strongly is showing up to the court cases of those that I know for a fact attacked me and assaulted me. I make it a mission to be there regardless of where I'm at. I provide statements to the court, speak to the FBI, to the prosecutor. Just last week, we had 2 former military members. One of them received 6 years and a half, 5 years and a half, and the other one 7 years and a half. One of them worked for the State Department, political claim, and he tried to use his position to claim that he was doing his official business. I don't recall the State Department giving you rights or position that where you could take a part in the insurrection. The same thing with the military. The other one, he claimed that he had PTSD, and his lawyer was explaining to the judge that because of his PTSD, something from war, he did what he did. And I had to prepare a statement to speak to the judge, and I didn't read the statement. I told the judge, I have the statement, but I'm not going to read the statement because this is so much for me. In the same day, 2 different military persons were using their prior service as a way to get out of and seek leniency. And I'm like, if I use my PTSD, because the way his lawyer was describing his sentences, I'm like, he's describing everything that I go through with the VA, with the military, and my service overseas. And that did not catapult me to attack the Capitol or remove myself and let the rioters go through and attack the congressman and his colleagues. As a matter of fact, because of my military service, I took it up on myself to remain there. When some of my officers from the Capitol Police removed themselves to deploy within the Capitol, I stayed there at the in the tunnel because I knew only Metropolitan Police officers were there, and they needed somebody from Capitol just in case they had any questions. on how to defend it or plan or tactically, I remained there. Meanwhile, some of the officers from Capitol Police went the other way to secure all the entrances. So I use my service and my PTSD in a positive way. Meanwhile, he's using it as an excuse to get out of jail. And the other thing is, I have to say is, because I show up to these court cases, I notice that every single time I do show up, they get harsher sentences because I'm there. I have not shown up to a couple of them, and the perpetrators, they get less, like 3 years instead of 5, 6. Why not? Because the judge, all they see is there's nobody here, there's not a victim. And yes, they are a victim. I just cannot make to each one of those cases, but I do make it a mission to go to the most that I can.
Can I follow up with a question for you, Sergeant Gonell? Because we know that Donald Trump is very sincere in his call for vengeance and revenge against his enemies. And if he gets in, he's saying he's going to round people up and deport people and all of this stuff. Some of the defendants have expressed their remorse or their regret. Do you think that that is sincere among the people you've seen?
I only had, out of probably 20 people that I already had gone through, and I was assaulted by more than 50. A lot of them have been arrested the past 3 months regarding my cases. There's only one case that I kind of like really got me emotional, and that was because he had a kid, his military as well, and I realized that both our lives were ruined by that guy. Both our lives. And the way I think that one was the only sincere person that I came, because he's the one that actually injured my shoulder. And he regretted based on what he said. And I found it sincere. Nevertheless, I don't excuse him, and he did what he did. Now he has to pay for it. But it did get me emotional, that one.
The others?
No, because, and the reason why I find it more emotional is because he's the one that I almost killed. Sorry. I almost transitioned from to get my weapon and use lethal force.
Yeah. Sergeant Gonell, you told me about actually that it really helped you to be a part of the January 6 hearings and to have people like Congressman Raskin listen to you, and also Liz Cheney. Was that a turning point? Did that help you? The fact that that there were so many people that wanted to hear your story and believing you and listening to you, and it was being televised. You were getting a lot of support. Did that help?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that Jamie Raskin and his colleagues from the Democrat side, they were very supportive. But in terms of the Republicans, except for Liz Cheney and Adam Kinsley, they're the only one. I once ran into Lindsey Graham in the elevator by ourselves, just me and him. And I normally, whenever there's a congressman or elected official, I just see yield to them to path, the elevator, whatnot. And on that day, that was like summer 2022, right before the recess, the summer recess, and I made it a point to not even yield to him. I went in through the elevator before him. I bumped him out of the way. I pressed the button to go to the second floor and put the radio loud enough so he could know that it was me, Sergeant Gonell. I'm heading up to the rotunda to help you with whatever situation we have going on. And it just, him and I with the elevator with just this apart, like arm length. And that guy, he just turned his back. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say how are you feeling? My bad. Nothing. Not that I was expecting it, because I wasn't, especially from him, kissing his boss behind. But I find it that out of all those Republicans, just Liz Cheney and Anna Kinzinger took it upon themselves to actually listen to Hodges, myself, and Michael Fanone. And going back to your question earlier, you were saying why nobody else came up for it. I think a lot of the officers themselves, they felt like nothing would change, and in part, it hasn't, because look how the Republicans treat us. If you look at, I fit every category of what a immigrant should look like and be according to their checkbox, and yet they ridicule me. Yet they push me away. They don't believe anything that we say, and I have sacrificed more than a lot of them, more than the president, former president himself, because he dodged the draft 5 times. He had, using his wealth, position, and influence. I came from the Dominican Republic, and I had spent half of my life defending this country or being a public servant one way or the other. And not a lot of people born here in this country can say that.
Yeah. Congressman Raskin, I know that you have to leave soon. Could you tell me, from your point of view, what were the benefits of the January 6th hearing? I mean, do you think that was very important, that it was televised and that we had 4 police officers who were speaking the truth?
Well, Susan, we live in an age of propaganda and disinformation, and people rewrite history like that, and it's a very Orwellian situation out there. It's got very 1984. And the January 6th committee operated in a truly bipartisan way. I mean, it's really the only committee I've served on in Congress that really had a bipartisan focus and bipartisan unity. And there were lots of disagreements behind the scenes about things, but not along party lines. There were different theories about what to focus on and what not, and what to emphasize and what not. And, certain things were de-emphasized. I mean, the role of white supremacy, the role of Christian white nationalism, these things were de-emphasized, and the focus really was on Donald Trump and how he organized this attack, because he was the key figure. But, the role of the social media, for example, was something else that was, that was kind of de-emphasized. But I think that we got the core of the story out to America. And in a way, remember, the vast majority of our witnesses were Trump family members, or in the Trump White House, or Republicans around the country, like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia. So when, Kevin McCarthy starts whining about, oh, this was partisan, I say, well, it might seem partisan because all the witnesses were Republicans, but there were Democrats involved. So we were able to establish the truth before the propaganda and the disinformation can set in. And that's a real problem for Donald Trump. And I think that created both the factual predicate and the courage for prosecutors around the country to say, wait a second, just because you were president doesn't mean you can commit crimes and get away with it. And so, he's at this point facing the consequences of his own criminal actions, and again, continues to try to agitate against the whole legal system.
And do you think this is going to have an effect on whether or not he can run, or so far not?
Well, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that you've sworn an oath to support the Constitution, and you violate the oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion, you can never hold federal or state office again. There's litigation in Colorado and some other places, and I think ultimately the Supreme Court, which we know has been gerrymandered by Donald Trump and the Republicans, is going to have to decide on that question. And so I'm not counting on that at all. I hope nobody in this room is counting on it. We need to go out and organize. Remember, Donald Trump lost to Hillary Clinton by 2.5 million votes, even though he won the Electoral College. Joe Biden beat him by 7 million votes. And The big difference between 2020 and 2024 is going to be 15 or 20 million new young voters and immigrants turned U.S. citizens. And so the question is whether we can just register everybody to vote, get everybody to understand the stakes of this election and turn them out against the GOP, which has shown that they're willing to do anything to try to thwart democracy.
Not really. Honestly.
Yeah. I got to go, but I want to thank you all for coming out to support my friend, Sergeant Gonell. Read this book. You'll read it in one setting. It goes like that. It's a beautiful book. And I want to thank you for hanging tough and being brave, my friends.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you, Congressman.
Before he goes, I brought you a present. I know it's not a marriage proposal. Don't get any idea. This is a replica of the gold medal that we received. Thanks for you for supporting it and supporting it forward.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.